Hey, what's up everybody? Today I come to you with another Isle video, but instead of gameplay, we're going to be talking about it instead. More specifically, what are the best dinosaurs in the game? Yep, that's what I'm doing, a tier list of all the dinosaurs in the Isle currently. With the remake on the horizon, I feel that now's the best time to look back onto the game in its current state, as a sort of time capsule to the time before we go into this new era with fancy new environments and a load of new dinosaurs to play as and look out for. I'm so excited for the remake to finally come and change things up. I'm personally going to be a Carnotaurus main, for certain reasons. I'd like to say before I begin that this is not to show bias towards certain dinosaurs, and that this tier list is founded on what I consider balanced, which I'll get into in a bit. Also, and I'm adding this after writing the entire script, this video came out a lot longer than I thought it would be, so here's timestamps to the 3 parts that this video is structured in case you want to cut the bullshit and get to the point. Alright, with that out of the way, let's begin. Okay, so before I can answer what dinosaurs are the best and worst, there is a more important question to answer, although it is much more controversial. Is the Isle actually balanced? I'm sure there are some people right now probably laughing at the notion, but it is important to understand if we are going to argue that some dinosaurs are better than others. What is considered balanced? Well, to me anyway, whether or not the game provides a balanced experience comes down to a few factors. Keep in mind that I'll only be covering what the official servers use, as that is the intended Isle experience. As such, aspects of unofficial servers, like sandbox dinosaurs and no alt turn, will not be taken into account when discussing the game's balance. They are innately not meant to be balanced. I feel that the most important aspect of the Isle currently when it comes to balance, in the simplest way possible, is fairness within matchups. What this means is, if you and another player meet in a hostile interaction, and then you die in said interaction, it should be your fault. For example, let's say a Utahraptor player and a Rex player encounter one another. The Rex player has the fairness in this matchup because, while he couldn't exactly run from the Utahraptor player if he wanted to, he is easily capable of defending himself, and would be the winner of the fight in a standard confrontation. The Utahraptor player also has the fairness in this matchup because, while he probably wouldn't win in a fight, he has the option to just turn around and run. A lot of people seem to forget that the game isn't all about combat, and simply the best course of action in a situation could be to just not fight at all. An obviously imbalanced matchup would be if, regardless of what the player could have done in a standard situation, he died no matter what. AKA, he can't run, and he can't fight. This isn't the only factor that determines whether or not the Isle is balanced, but it's the biggest one. There are 2 exceptions to this rule, however. The most obvious one is growth, as the majority of dinosaurs in the Isle are basically small and useless until they reach adulthood, so this aspect doesn't really apply to them. I personally argue that this is one of the many reasons why growth in the Isle is a rather poorly done system, but that can be an entire video all on its own. This also doesn't really apply to imbalance in groups, like if a single Rex is being challenged by a pack of Gigas. Sure, the Rex can't do much in that confrontation, but it isn't exactly unfair because that Rex player easily could have been roaming with a posse of his own to prevent this. There are other factors that play into balance as well, but they are more situational, and they'll be covered in further detail when I get to the dinosaurs that they apply to. You got growth times, the physical environment, or how well a dinosaur functions in certain habitats like open fields and dense forests, the server environment, or who plays as what's generally popular to play as, and sometimes the actual stats take priority over exactly how the dinosaur is balanced. Now it's time to answer the big question. Is the Isle balanced? Well, yes, but actually no. Something that I have to praise the Isle for is that in the last patch before the hiatus, they left the game in potentially the most balanced state it has ever been. Rexes aren't every 5 feet, there's no mega herding care bearing groups, and herbivores are not pathetically useless. There's not a ton of balance issues in general with the game's current mechanics, at least compared to before, and you can play as even the worst dinosaurs and still have a decent experience. There is currently an idea sparking around that herbivores are still bad compared to carnivores, but as we'll see in a bit, this isn't exactly true. In fact, I'd argue that herbivores are potentially better than carnivores generally speaking. If this is the case, then why does everybody play Carnivore? The way I see it, there's probably 3 main reasons as to why Carnivores are preferred. Natural carnivore bias. Everybody wants to be the big bad apex predator like in the movies. It's only natural. More interesting gameplay. Don't get me wrong, herbivore gameplay doesn't have to be boring, but at least carnivores facilitate action because you have to kill things to survive. With herbivores, that doesn't exactly happen all the time. In an ideal scenario, you can just sit in bushes the whole game eating plants and don't have to worry about people. Carnivore gameplay is more developed. The game in its current state facilitates more developed gameplay from the carnivores, things like tracking, ambushing, and stalking. Herbivores don't really have any of that, it's just running around eating plants. All these factors together mean that carnivore gameplay is generally more attractive and interesting, so people like to play them more. This does not mean, however, that herbivores are worse than carnivores. They're just as good if anything. So, in conclusion, is the owl balanced? Not completely, but it's the best the game has ever been. I'll go over the specific balance problems when I actually discuss what's in the title, the owl tier list. Alright, finally time to discuss which dinosaurs are the worst and the best. Here's a very basic tier list right here, ripped straight from Tier List Maker, you know. We're going to start from the worst and climb up to the best. First up in F tier, we have Ceratosaurus, which unfortunately is also my favorite carnivore in the game. Why is Ceratosaurus the worst dinosaur in the aisle? 2 words, Allosaurus and bleed. Allosaurus is, for all intents and purposes, a better Ceratosaurus. Who does more damage? Allosaurus. Cerato has higher base damage, but Allo's weight means that it still beats Cerato damage-wise, not to mention Allosaurus has much better bleed. And since Allosaurus is bigger, it also has more durability. If a Ceratosaurus can't match up to Allosaurus in a fight, it's at least faster than it, right? Well, not exactly. It is true that in terms of the raw speed stat, Ceratosaurus is slightly faster, but Ceratosaurus still fails in all of the categories. Allosaurus has much better stamina than Ceratosaurus, as well as its astonishingly fast ambush speed. There isn't much a Ceratosaurus can do if an Allosaurus wants it. The Allo will catch up eventually. Ceratosaurus' other massive shortcoming is that it is extremely weak to bleed. Bleed goes through a Ceratosaurus' health very quickly, and you can't shake it off easily. For context, very few bites from Utahs or Diablos very easily bring a Cerato to low health, and may kill it entirely if it doesn't sit down. There's no other carnivore in the game that is this soft to typical combat. It can make a fight with basically anything that causes bleed a chore, and generally makes it one of the worst dinosaurs in the game. In D tier, there's Pachycephalosaurus, my personal favorite herbivore in the game. I don't think anybody's surprised that it's one of the worst dinosaurs in the game, although people tend to go for the easy answer of it gets bodied by everything, which isn't really true. When Pachy was first introduced to survival, that was true. But since then, Pachy's been given a speed buff which lets it evade the majority of its predators. Unfortunately, Pachy is still a poor pick for many reasons, which coincidentally are pretty similar as to why Cerato is pretty bad in the first place as well. Utahraptors are an absolute bane to Pachy players, since they're fast enough to not really run away from, and Pachys don't do enough damage to them to be reliably threatening. In the past, Pachys used to be able to two-shot Utahs, which made them deadly to Utahs when they needed to be. However, one of the last patches prior to the hiatus buffed the Utah's weight, which meant that Pachys did not hit it as hard anymore. Pachys, who used to be able to two-shot Utahraptors, now needed to three-shot them. This drastically increases the favor in combat to Utahraptor, who can now afford to take a hit or two in order to do damage and stack bleed. Speaking of bleed, it's also one of Pachy's biggest weaknesses. Even minor bleed for a Pachy can be dangerous, and this weakness to bleed leaves it very vulnerable to Diablos. Although I will say it's not entirely one-sided, since Pachys are faster than them. A Diablo needs to be sure it's got the element of surprise so it doesn't get bodied instantly. There's also the fact that, for some goddamn reason, Pachy takes more time to grow than the Maiasaura, which is a much better dinosaur in basically all aspects. Overall, while not as bad as Cerato, Pachy is currently in a very poor state, and it's one of the dinosaurs I hope gets the love and attention it needs in the remake. Moving on, Suchomimus is a damn good dinosaur in the right conditions. In terms of raw power, Suchomimus is virtually unmatched among the non-apexes. A grown Sukko can take on Maias, Carnos, Allos, Paras, and potentially Diablos as well. It is a decent heavyweight against these types of dinosaurs, and as a result it is pretty hard to mess with. However, Sukkos has one very big flaw. It performs extremely poorly against apexes. Sukkos is one of the slowest carnivores, which against non-apexes is not that much of a big deal. It's among the strongest of them anyway, so it doesn't really need to be fast. However, its slow speed means that it has a very hard time dealing with Rexes and Gigas. The ambush speed of Rex means that Sukkos have a very hard time escaping unless they're lucky, and sub-adult Rexes in particular are potentially more dangerous than the adults, given they easily catch up to Sukkos and are very similar in power when they're larger. However, it is Gigas that really drive the nail in the coffin for Sukko. Gigas are endurance machines. A Giga can trot down a Sukko from basically any distance without breaking a sweat. There's basically nothing a Sukko can do to prevent this. Now I know that there are probably some people that are wondering. Many servers, including official, tend to let Sukkos free on the no camping water rule, so Sukkos can potentially use it as a safe zone. This is all well and good, but the logistics of this strategy are kind of shaky, considering it's a rule barrier to something as in the moment as hunting, and there's not really anything stopping a shady player from just killing you anyway. Sukkos, I'd argue, is not really a bad dinosaur, but its matchup against apexes leaves it pretty underpowered right now. Moving up into B tier, we're getting into the stuff that's actually pretty decent. Prehistoric has had a shaky history in terms of its balance and survival, but in the current patch it has a lot of things going for it. While not the fastest thing on the planet, Paras are still among one of the most durable and hard-hitting herbivores, capable of killing an Allosaurus in just 3 hits. While pretty decent up front, the Para does have a bunch of small issues. While the attacks of the Prehistoric are pretty strong, they are clunky, awkward, and unresponsive. It's often hard to land an attack how you want it, and it's hard to tell whether your attacks actually hit or not in the first place. While Para's durability is really good, its bleed heal is atrocious. A single bite from a Carno can take several minutes of resting to wear off, which is kinda ridiculous for something its size. Lastly, while not too slow, and it has amazing stamina, its stam regeneration is long. Too long. Having to spend so much time recovering stam leaves Para more vulnerable than it should be to things like Gigas, Rexes, and Allos. Each of these issues wouldn't be that big of a deal individually, but all of them together leave Para as a dinosaur that needs some work. Don't get me wrong, Para is still a decent dinosaur, but these issues stop it from being truly good. Removing just 1 or 2 of these issues would put Para in a much better state than it currently is. Now we are getting into the high tiers. A tier in particular is where the majority of the Isle's dinosaurs lie, which is thanks to the fairly good state that the game was left in balance-wise. Starting with the smallest dinosaur, Drysaurus is very good for what it is. It is fast and nimble, capable of evading the majority of the cast, either through raw speed or simply being good at turning on the run. The only major threat that Dryos have is Utahraptors, which are very similar in terms of mobility. However, it is still possible to evade them if you're good enough in dense foliage, and you could always retreat into a burrow you've made and wait them out. While only really useful if you plan on staying in a single area, burrows provide great shelter during the night and as a guaranteed escape route from any predator chasing you. Next in A tier are the Bork Boys themselves, the Utahraptors. Utahraptor is probably the easiest and safest carnivore to play as in the Isle. Extremely fast and nimble, not much can catch or escape from a Utahraptor in a chase. This, combined with being easy to grow, means that there are always Utahraptors roaming around in large numbers. Sure, Utahraptor is the smallest carnivore, so there's not really many other types of players that they can take on by themselves, but these factors all contribute to the large-scale pack hunting gameplay that attracts players to raptors in the first place. Overall, they're a great dinosaur, and they're my personal recommendation for beginners. Next up in A tier is probably my most controversial pick. Dilophosaurus and the Isle are notorious for their nocturnal habits and dangerous amounts of bleed. Dilophosaurs are at home in the dark, able to see better at night than any other dinosaur. Their bleed is also among the best in the game, which makes them the premier nighttime hit-and-run assassins. This playstyle of being unseen in the darkness, ducking in and out from seemingly nowhere, killing people with bleed, makes Dilophosaurus hated by practically all players, fresh-spawned juvies and fully grown apexes alike. It's enough to make many players think that they are even overpowered. However, there are many aspects of Dilophosaurus that keep them from being too strong. Dilophosaurs lack the high mobility that Utahraptors have, despite being similar in size, which means that they often do have to rely on the cover of darkness, as out during the day, they could potentially get spotted and picked off by Carnos, Allos, and Rexes if they're not careful. Also, given their specialty towards bleed, Dilos don't really hit that hard all by themselves in terms of raw damage. This means that Dilos are actually screwed by most things once they're actually caught. Even Utah and Packy have a chance of killing a Dilo if they get in its face. I'm sure that there are some people that don't agree with me on this one, but I think these reasons keep Dilo from becoming S tier, and it stays with the rest of the boys in A tier. A tier also contains the extremists of the carnivore roster, Carnotaurus. Carnotaurus is about one thing and one thing only: speed. Carnotaurus is easily the fastest dinosaur in the entire game. While a few of the dinosaurs come close, Carnotaurus is number one in a straight sprint. However, being a large predator like this, while also being the fastest dinosaur in the game, has a catch. You see, while Carnotaurus can cover distances very quickly and efficiently, it is very bad at the whole turning thing. To put it simply, Carnotaurus turns like a cruise ship. This makes Carnotaurus fairly easy to dodge for slower and smaller dinosaurs, especially if the Carno player is inexperienced. This poor agility also means that Carnotaurus function quite poorly in dense forested areas, which promotes them to stick onto the open regions of the map where they can run freely. This whole turning problem with Carnotaurus is something that can be worked around by an experienced Carno player, given they can control their speed, but it still limits them quite a bit compared to other dinosaurs. Choosing Carnotaurus is a tricky playstyle that is not for everyone, but it definitely rewards those that know how to use the dinosaur correctly, being able to escape most threats fairly easily, while still being able to chase down prey and cover the map quickly. We are still not done. Next is Allosaurus. There is not really much I could say about the Allosaurus, because it is the very definition of basic, attack basic, size basic, bleed basic. Everything about it is just good, in the simplest way possible. It still stands out in a few ways though. It has an exceptionally fast ambush speed, which allows it to get the jump on Dilos, Maias, and Paras. Allosaurus' main weakness is that, despite being fairly in the middle in terms of size and power, it's actually fairly slow, which can leave it vulnerable to Rexes and Gigas. There isn't really much else I can say about Allo because of its simplicity, so we'll just move on from here. Moving on to another A tier herbivore, Diabloceratops makes it into A tier due to being a swift powerhouse. Players sometimes make the mistake of underestimating Diablos, due to them not being as large or impressive as Triceratops. The players that think this, however, are in for a rude awakening. Diablos are often joked to be better Allos, and this is not entirely unjust. Diabloceratops are extremely powerful, capable of taking on almost anything that isn't an apex. A Carno or Allo is no match for an angry Diabloceratops, and even subadult Rexes and Sukkos have to be very careful when confronting one. Experienced Diablos, with their high damage and maneuverability, can be capable of taking on entire packs of Utahs and Dilos all by itself. This power is matched by surprising speed for a Ceratopsid, capable of keeping pace with Allos and Gigas. There is a misconception floating around that Gigas make Diablos fodder, but this isn't really true, because Diablos have amazing endurance, one of the best in the game, in fact. While stamina is regenerated at a standard pace when walking and trotting, stamina regenerates at an insanely fast rate when resting. Through the repeated cycle of resting and sprinting, Diablos leave Gigas in the dust. It's not impossible for Gigas to catch up if they manage to close the distance fast enough and remain persistent, but Diablos are still far from fodder. All these factors together make Diablos extremely dangerous and reliable herbivores to play as, so long as you stay out of the way of apexes. Speaking of apexes, before I can wrap up A tier and go into S tier, I need to talk about them specifically, since they are a rather special case compared to the other dinosaurs. While I generally agree that the tiers of dinosaurs like in progression no longer exist, there still seems to be a very real divide between the apex and non-apex dinosaurs. Compared to non-apex dinosaurs, apex dinosaurs are extremely large, in both body size and stats. Allosaurus vs Suchomimus, for example, is a fight that can take quite a bit of effort from both parties involved, but a Rex or Giga can just end either of them in 2 bites, while in contrast these Rexes and Gigas are also nearly untouchable to them by comparison. Apex dinosaurs are automatically top tier because of just how extreme their stats are. Despite taking much longer to grow than all the other dinosaurs in the game, even having an entirely new subadult stage to get through before adulthood, they are still more worth your time compared to non-apexes. If you compare these apex dinosaurs to non-apex dinosaurs of similar niche and build, and you do the math, you find that, per minute spent growing them, apex dinosaurs offer far more of a reward compared to their non-apex counterparts. For this reason, these dinosaurs are basically S tier by default. If there were other dinosaurs that bridge the massive size gap between apex and non-apexes, probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. While most apexes are S tier, for a certain apex, it's a bit more complicated than that. Triceratops was easily the hardest for me to rank out of all the dinosaurs in the Isle. The sheer stats of the trike automatically make it top tier, but exactly where is a bit problematic. The Triceratops is no joke in terms of raw power. At 8.3 tons, it is the largest creature you can play as.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
And it's one of the most powerful dinosaurs in the Isle, period. It's the only other dinosaur in the game that can actually take on T-Rex in a straight fight, which is a feat not even Giga can claim. However, Triceratops has some notably weird shortcomings too. Despite being able to take T-Rex in a straight fight, the matchup doesn't seem as much in the Trike's favor as it should be, given it's easily the slowest dinosaur on the Isle. Not to mention the server's current environment means that Triceratops generally have more to worry about than the apex carnivores do. While Giga and Rex only really have to worry about each other most of the time, Triceratops got pressure from both of them at once. There's also the fact that out of all the apexes, Trike easily has the worst subadult stage, yet Trikes can also form larger groups than Gigas and Rexes do. You can see why this is a bit complicated. All these things don't seem like a big deal, but altogether they definitely make Trike seem like the worst of the three, so I have a hard time believing it belongs in S tier. It'll join the rest of the roster in A tier. In reference to the other two apexes, I'm going to try to be brief, because who the fuck am I kidding, they're S tier. Tyrannosaurus is easily the most powerful dinosaur in the Isle currently. There's almost nothing that can mess with an adult Rex, save for other apexes and maybe groups of Dilophosaurs. Tyrannosaurs are also really effective in familial units, as subadults are much more mobile than adults are, while still not being that pathetic in power themselves. The T-Rex's infamously high damage, being the only dinosaur with bone break and fast run speed, has left it as being labeled as overpowered by certain members of the community. While I do think Rex is too good, I don't think it's outright overpowered. While T-Rex has all these advantages, it does have one glaring weakness. T-Rex has easily the worst stamina out of any of the Isle's dinosaurs. Sure, it can run pretty fast, but it can't keep that up for long. The stamina pool is so small that almost anything is capable of escaping from a Tyrannosaurus, so long as they see it coming. The most dangerous Rex is the one that you don't see. See a Rex coming? You can run away. If a Rex manages to get within striking range unnoticed, however, your odds of surviving are that much lower. Giganotosaurus does not have the same reputation the Isle's Tyrannosaurs do, but they are arguably more optimized. While not having the insane damage values that Rex has, it still has enough damage to 1 or 2 shot the majority of the cast, while also having one of the best bleed stats to boot. All this power is packed within a body that is much better outfitted for movement than Rex's. The Giga's alt turn is ridiculously fast compared to Rex's, which makes it nearly untouchable for Diablos. And while Rex is only fast in a short sprint, Giganotosaurs are amazing at long distance pursuits, having one of the best trots in the game and decent stamina. This is probably the most dangerous thing about Giga, and is what allows it to be a huge threat to a massive amount of the game's roster. To close out the tier list, we got our last two dinosaurs, which some people might not have expected to be S tier. Gallimimus is the absolute king of evasion. To put in simple terms, unless you are a thrill seeker or an absolute idiot, Gallies are basically immortal once they are grown. They are the second fastest dinosaur in the entire game, only beaten by Carnotaurus, while also having godlike agility, to the point where even Utahraptor can barely keep up. On top of this, they have stamina for absolute days, which leaves out stamming them out of the question as well. In a nutshell, Gallimimus is way too safe, and if you don't want to die, like, ever, it's your pick. Maiasaura is in a similar boat. It is the third fastest dinosaur in the game. Yep, you heard that right. This bastard is faster than Utahraptors. This makes escaping practically anything that can actually trouble it a breeze. But Maya is not good only because it's super fast, although as we'll explain later, it really helps. You'd figure that it's so fast because it's weak, but you couldn't be any more wrong. Sure, against something like an Allo or Rex it's not going to have a good time, but it's an absolute powerhouse against the more lightweight predators. Not only does its large size make it chunky, but it's an absolute bleed juggernaut. If you bite it as a Utah or Dilo, it will not give a fuck and keep running at you at blazing speeds. These things can have 2 drops of bleed on them and still run for miles. Any Utah or Dilo has the complete right to be afraid of Maias because they are absolute monsters in the right hands. Good Maia players can even fight Carnos and come out on top, which for something typically seen as just a weak Hadrosaur is a pretty impressive feat. Overall, none of this would be as insane, but it is way too fast for its own good currently, since it's way faster than anything that can actually threaten it. Alright, there you go. That is my Isle tier list looking at the current Isle cast. I'm sure there's some people that would disagree with me with how I rank these guys, but that's the nature of a tier list. These things can vary from person to person, even if I try to prevent that, so I'm curious to see your input in the comments. I guess that wraps everything up. Thank you so much for watching. This video took a long time to write and edit, so if you could leave a comment down below with your own opinions, as well as a like, that'd be great. Tell me what y'all thought of this video. I've always wanted to make more in-depth content like this, but I've often lacked the drive and time to do so I was happy I was able to finally put this one out. Alright guys, enough rambling, I'll leave you to it. See you around everyone!